What's up guys, and welcome to a head-to-head comparison video between a modified ND2 Miata versus a brand new bone stock ND3 Miata. The question I want to answer is, which one should you spend your money on? You can buy a stock used ND2 for around $25,000 today. An equivalent trim ND3 would be about $7,000 to $10,000 more. What if you spent that additional money on modifications? Will it make the ND2 a far better driver's car than a stock ND3? Or are the improvements that Mazda made for the ND3 facelifted generation still enough to justify paying for the brand new car? So this is a 2019 model year with the club trim, meaning we get the Brembo brakes, the BBS wheels, and the Recaro seats. The owner, Ron, has done a huge number of mods to this. I'll put the list in the video description, but some of the main items to call out: we have the Koni adjustable sport shocks, Flyin Miata lowering springs, some Goodwin Racing front and rear sway bars, Advan Racing TC4 wheels, they're 16x8 all around, and some General G-Max RS tires. As a reminder, this car comes with front double wishbone suspension, rear multi-link, electric power steering, 6-speed manual transmission with a rear LSD, although you can also get this with a 6-speed automatic. With the soft top, this car should weigh just over 2,300 pounds. It has a 2-liter inline 4-cylinder engine making 181 horsepower and 151 pound-feet of torque. It revs out to an impressive 7,500 RPM, and this car is all about smiles per mile, smiles per gallon, whatever you want to call it. It puts a smile on your face. So let's drive this thing and then hop into that brand new ND3. Now this does have a Flyin Miata valved exhaust, which interestingly enough, I've never seen this before. You can use the speed of the windshield wiper to adjust how much the valve opens. So we're just gonna jump all the way up to fully open, and away we go. Oh yeah, that exhaust really adds a nice tone, because this engine is way too quiet from the factory, in my opinion. Immediate turn in. Look at that. Something I've always loved about Miatas, but especially the ND generation. It handles the best out of all the generations. If you want that lightweight, nimble feeling. Oh yes. What a little handler. The car just rotates. These Koni adjustable shocks and Flyin Miata lowering springs, they're a decent upgrade, I would say. Better than I expected for a non-coilover setup, but you still do feel some limitations. These shocks just don't feel all that dialed in, and over some of the bumps, it is a little bit harsh. But the amount of body roll has been drastically decreased compared to stock. Even the stock car with Bilstein dampers, which is what that ND3 has, as we'll find out in just a moment, it's a roly-poly little car in the corners. So what did Mazda do for the ND3 generation over the ND2? The main two things: they retuned the EPS steering with less friction in the steering rack in order to increase steering feel, and they retuned the limited slip differential with more lockup on deceleration and less lockup on acceleration. Should make the car feel a little bit more stable in the corners. We'll have to find out if that's the case on a canyon road. Excellent little 6-speed manual. It's so slick, so smooth, short throws, short gear lever. It matches the character of this car so well. It's a car that you can just toss around. Very easy to hop into and start driving it pretty quickly. These Brembo brakes with some upgraded pads and StopTech rotors, they feel really good. More than adequate for a 2,300 pound car. Well, this car does have a little bit of instability at higher speed and third gear, fourth gear corners. I do feel like it's very sensitive to what I'm doing with the throttle. A little bit of a clunking from the rear, not sure what that is. So easy to heel toe rev match. Throttle response, so direct, even though it's drive-by-wire. It's such a nimble, great handling car. With these mods, I would say the steering feel is noticeably improved over a stock ND2 or ND1 because of the more aggressive alignment, the lowered ride height with stiffer springs, more aggressive dampers. The steering is pretty good. I would say the on-center feel still a little bit lacking. It's a little bit loose. As you can see, a few degrees off center doesn't really cause much of a reaction from the front tires. We'll need to see if the ND3 steering rack addresses that issue. But when you get the front tires loaded up in the corner, this ND2 feels pretty good. Gives me a decent amount of weight increase in the rack, but as I mentioned earlier, there is a little bit of nervousness mid-corner, but it is a little bit nerve-wracking. Now if we close this exhaust valve all the way, there's noticeably less volume, but the character of the sound is the same. I really like that. It sounds a lot closer to stock now. See there, right when I flip that knob, the volume increases by a few decibels at least. What a fun little car. The ND2 with some mods is such a great platform for driving enjoyment. Whether you're trying to go 10/10ths on a racetrack, or you just want to enjoy this car on a sunny day with the top down, or somewhere in between, a nice canyon drive perhaps, like we're doing today. It's a car that can be enjoyed in so many conditions, as long as your main goal is driving pleasure. But are you better off just buying an ND3 and leaving it stock? Just how big are the improvements that they've made? Are they enough to make the ND3 preferable at the same price compared to a modified ND2? Let's find out. All right, we're now in the 2024 Mazda MX-5 Miata ND3 generation. This is the Grand Touring retractable fastback. MSRP of this car with destination right around $39,000. So quite a bit more than a $25,000 used ND2 with a soft top. But keep in mind that you don't have to get the Grand Touring, you don't have to get the RF. A regular soft top Club is several $1,000s cheaper than this, and in my opinion would be the way to go. You get the Brembo brakes, the BBS wheels, the Recaro seats. These seats are very comfortable, but they're nowhere near as supportive in terms of your back and your thighs compared to the Recaros in that ND2 we just drove. Overall look and feel of the interior, we have this much shorter but wider infotainment display. It's a higher resolution. We get wireless CarPlay and Android Auto. It is a slightly better interior than the ND2, but it's not a game changer. Are the mechanical improvements a game changer? Again, that's the question. Being an RF though, this one weighs a little bit more, actually quite a bit more, about 100 pounds more. So 2,452 pounds is the manufacturer claimed curb weight. Just to recap, the changes they made for the ND3, a revised steering rack. Also, the limited slip differential has been retuned for more lockup on decel, less lockup on acceleration. Also, we now have a track mode for the traction control. It used to be only on or off. Now this car, being a press car, only has 600 miles on the odometer. And one of the first things I'm noticing is that the shifter feels a lot stiffer than that ND2. I think that's just because the transmission hasn't been broken in. I'm not aware of any changes they made to the shifter itself. Stock exhaust is just a little too quiet with this car, in my opinion. The engine doesn't make much noise. It's a buzzy little engine. Not much induction note, not much exhaust sound. Definitely could use an aftermarket exhaust. though this has the base brakes, not the Brembos, the car stops perfectly fine for canyon driving. In fact, I don't even really notice a big difference in brake feel at all between this and the Brembos on the ND2. What I do notice though is the suspension. It's so much softer than the Koni shock plus Flyin Miata lowering spring combo. And you either love it or you hate it. This is the firmest suspension you can get on a Miata from the factory, and yet it feels so soft. It's roly-poly in the corners. It takes a moment for the car to set when you turn into a corner, which is not the case with that modified example. But what about the steering and LSD changes? So in terms of the steering, there actually is a noticeable improvement, even compared to a modified ND2 that's been lowered with a little bit of camber and stiffer suspension. With this steering rack, what I'm feeling is that there isn't actually more information about the road surface necessarily coming through the wheel, but the steering loads up better in the corners, meaning the steering effort increases more as the lateral G's increase on those front tires. In the ND2, even with those mods, it feels a little bit light, mid-corner especially. Here you get a more natural, progressive increase in weight as you turn harder. And that's really nice. It gives me more confidence as a driver in terms of what those front tires are doing. Now, in terms of the LSD, that's hard to say. Because I'm driving a modified ND2 versus a stock ND3, it's hard to say what behaviors are due to the LSD versus other factors. But I will say that when I drove this ND3 on track in Club RF trim, it felt more stable than any ND1 or ND2 I've driven, especially on turn-in. And as you can see there, it doesn't understeer. Even in second gear corners, full throttle, the car is very, very pointy on corner entry and on corner exit. The ND3 doesn't feel as nervous on turn-in, especially going into a third gear or second gear corner at speed. It still turns in very sharply, but it doesn't immediately want to kick the rear end out. So it's less snappy, it's more confidence inspiring. And that's a really nice change because to me there's no downsides. Oh, such a nimble little car. I am missing the firmness of that ND2's aftermarket suspension setup though. It just responds so much quicker to my inputs, and you don't have to wait for the car to set before you get back on the throttle. But here's the thing, if you're comparing a $25,000 ND2 bone stock against the same trim of ND3, also bone stock, is the extra, let's call it $10,000 to $12,000 worth it? I would say probably not. If you already have an ND2, there's no reason to upgrade to the ND3 in my opinion. While the steering differences are noticeable, and the LSD upgrades as well, although to a much lesser extent and really only on track, or if you're driving very aggressively on the street, it's definitely not a $10,000 improvement. Once you bake in the fact that we get a better interior and updated infotainment, you can maybe make an argument. But at the end of the day, my position is if you have an ND2, there's no reason to upgrade to the ND3. If you don't have any Miata, just go for the ND3. You get a new car warranty, the creature comforts, and you still get all the great qualities that made the ND2 so fun. It's a definite improvement over the ND2. And if you like the subtle exterior differences, like the headlights, the font for the MX-5 badging on the rear, there are subtle differences, but at the end of the day, you can't go wrong. ND1, ND2, ND3, they're all fantastic cars, and we should just be thankful that Mazda still makes the Miata, and that it's such a back to basics formula. They've kept that formula alive after all these years. Roughly 35 years after the NA Miata was released, the ND3 still feels 100% Miata. And that's maybe the best praise one can give any sub $40,000 sports car. So a big shout out to Mazda for making this review possible, and a big shout out to Ron, the owner of that ND2. Do you agree that if you already have an ND2, you should just keep it, but if you don't have a Miata, you should seriously consider the ND3? Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.